Hey guys, this is EdRoh. I know it's been quite some time since I last posted, but I have been sick with COVID for a very long time, and I'm just now close to being fully recovered. I'm so glad and excited to come back and bring you guys some content again. But anyways, today we're going to be building this complete full stack chat application along with ChatGPT and OpenAI integration. And we're going to be building all of this from scratch. All right, so in this application, we have this interface. We have a list of chats that we are a part of. And then we have a chat section where we can see the messages. We can say, hey, and we can post it, and other users in this section can see. And we can also send an image across, and we can open it. And we have a little preview over here. We can cancel it if we want to, but let's actually add it. And we can go and send our image. And once we have this image over here, it will be posted so everyone else can see. Also, we're gonna have more AI integration. So if I go over here into AI chat _ test, let's say I'm going, how is everything going? So if I ask a message and I send it, we can actually see we have Mr. AI bot named Steve to be answering everything is going well. Thank you for asking. We're talking to the OpenAI API and he is responding back. So we have this integration, but not only that, we can go to this section which has AI code and we can just say, give me a function that gives me random number JavaScript. And let's say we send that. And here he's going to give us a message that's going to give us a random number, a function in JavaScript. And then from here, we can go to AI Assist. And in this case, we're going to be using this to autocomplete. So if I say how to do, and then if I wait just a little bit after typing, it's going to give me an autocomplete suggestion. So I have all of this, and if I hit tab or enter, all of this is going to be filled out. Also, not only that, we can go to our login page. So this is a previous page, and we can write test user 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. We can hit register. Once we've registered, we can choose whether we want to log in. And once we hit login, we are now signed in as a new user. So for the technologies we'll be using for this particular application will range from front-end to back-end. So the front-end will consist of ChatEngine for our chat application, Redux Toolkit for our state management, Redux Toolkit Query for making API calls, React Router for navigation, and hero icons for the icons. For the backend, we'll be using Node.js as our runtime, Express.js as our backend framework, and OpenAI for AI integration with our chat. Now, I'll show you how to build this application from the ground up, and as with all my other videos, I'm dedicating this tutorial for both beginners who need step-by-step process of how to build everything, and experienced developers who just want to learn most of the best practices and understanding how to use certain packages. And finally, with all my apps, this website is completely designed all by me. I've created all of this ground up, so you're free to use parts or even the whole project for your portfolio. I hope you enjoy this application, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to be installing Node.js. So you can go to the description or the link in the description below to this website, and you can download whatever is recommended for you. For mine is Mac. I've already had this installed, so I'm not going to do that. But Node.js is basically, it allows developers to build and run server-side applications using JavaScript, which is traditionally used for client-side scripting in web browsers, but we can use this for our server-side applications. And then after that, we're going to be installing npx. So also a link in the description. You can go here and you can do npm i-g npx. So this is a package that will execute npm binaries for us, and it's something we'll be using. And finally, if you don't have a code editor or like a text editor for writing code, you can go to another link in the description for VS Code, and you can go to this website, download the VS Code version that you will need, and this will allow us to use our text editor. And after installing those, we're going to be using something called Vite. So if you know Create React App, Vite is an alternative to that, which is growing in popularity. It's basically like Create React App. It doesn't have as many pre-configurations and opinions as Create React App does, but it is a lot faster when you do hot module replacement. Basically, when you load up the server, it's going to be a lot faster compared to Create React App. But there are some things that you do have to kind of set up. All right, with that having been explained, we're going to be installing Vite, and we're going to be doing that. I'm going to go into our terminal of VS Code. I'm going to write npm create Vite at latest. So we have that. It's going to ask you for a project name, and I'm going to call this client. I'm going to choose React over here. I'm going to choose JavaScript as well. And what I'm going to do from here, I'm going to do cd client, and I'm going to run npm I. We're going to wait for that to finish. After that's installed, I want you guys to install some VS Code extensions, which I'll be using. And if you go to this button right here, it says extensions, we're going to click over. You're going to be installing this one, ES7 Plus Redux React Native snippets. We're going to be using this to create boilerplate code for us for React components. It makes it pretty easy. And then from here, we're also going to install Prettier if you haven't already. But Prettier is a nice extension that will format our JavaScript and TypeScript, and we'll make sure our package will be utilizing Prettier to format our code. And then from here, we're going to be installing some packages. By the way, if you see this .vs Code, this is some extra settings that I set. This is more for me personally when I record, so you don't have to worry about this. You probably won't have this, but I'll need it in my case. So I'm going to close this, and we're going to be installing certain packages. So we're going to be installing React Redux and Redux JS Toolkit. So to explain what this is doing, this is a state management library, and Redux Toolkit is probably by far the most recommended state management library that I suggest you guys use. You can use something like Jotai, or you can use Zustand. Those are all very popular and very simple to use, but Redux by far is one of the most established libraries, and it's good because a lot of people have used it, and a lot of edge cases are being utilized and making sure they're taken care of. So that's why you recommend Redux. But on top of that, Toolkit, which is just basically code on top of Redux that makes it much more easy to write. So that's why I highly recommend it. And then from here, we're going to be installing hero icon / React. So this is basically, I think it's by Tailwind, but basically it's an icon library that we can use for different use cases. And I'm going to install React Router DOM, and this will allow us to route to different pages of React. And also I'm going to install, actually this should not be at, so be careful, making sure you don't have that. And I'm going to install React Drop Zone. So this will allow me to add files into our pages for later, for the chat app. And then we're going to finally install React ChatEngine Advanced. So this is a chat package library that we'll be using. So make sure you have this written correctly, and potentially if in the future, I don't think any of these will change too much, but make sure you have the correct versions. And I will show you if you have any kind of installation problems. I'll show you the package.json that will show you the correct versions, and you can install them. You can install those versions directly by doing, for example, React Redux, something like npm I React Redux at whatever version you want. So for example, in my case, React-Redux, I'm using at 8.05. If in the future these versions get upgraded to a higher version and it breaks, then you can go back and install this and it will fix your problems. So just be aware of that. Sometimes I have no control over what these packages change as opposed to like what they upgrade. You can go directly to those versions. But a lot of times, especially with these older established libraries, like most of these, I would say, they will not cause you to break. Maybe React ChatEngine, if he updates this particular package, then you might want to use this particular version. So it just depends on your use case. Now, after we have downloaded those packages, we're going to go up, open our folder directory, and we're going to go into clients. And in our source directory, we're going to go to app CSS, and we're actually just going to delete this because we don't need that. Then we can go to app JSX. And over here, I'm going to just delete everything inside here. I'm just going to write app and change this to a lowercase, remove the count in use state, and remove all of the imports in this file. And then from here, I'm going to go to index.css. I'm going to select everything over here, and I'm going to save it. We don't need anything in here. Actually, we're just going to rename this to SCSS as well. And then if you go into a link in the description below, I have a link to the GitHub page where it includes all the CSS. And all you have to do is copy all the CSS in that file, and we're just going to paste it in here. So this includes all the styling we're going to need for this entire application. Now, the reason why I'm not focusing on CSS and any kind of styling for this project is because I really want to focus on the chat engine. I want to focus on basically the ChatGPT and the OpenAI integrations, as well as the chat application itself. So this video does not focus on any kind of CSS or styling. Now, after copying the CSS into this file, we're going to be going to main.jsx, and we're going to change this to SCSS because we changed the name of the file, and we're going to save that. And also, we're going to open up our terminal, and we're going to make sure we run this once. So we're going to run npm run dev. So with that, Vite is going to be able to show you that it's running on this port or this URL. So we're going to hit command or control click to open it up. And if you look, we do have a problem with dependency SAS not found. So we're going to be installing that. So we're forgetting one thing to install. So I'm going to cancel out of this with control C. And over here, I'm going to write npm i-d sass. So that means we're using this SCSS file, which is SAS, and we're installing the dependency of SAS into our package JSON. So over here, you can see now we have SAS, and we're going to rerun the server. I'm going to click open, and now we can see we have our app written from the app JSX file like over here. So everything is working as expected. And we're going to close out, and we're going to be doing some installation and setup for our React component chat app. So the next thing we're going to be installing is going to be ChatEngine. So basically, ChatEngine is a package which simplifies the process of building chat services. So if you were to build a chat application from scratch, there's a lot of infrastructure and complications when it comes to setting up communications and connecting users to other users. So using a service like this generally helps your project and makes it very easy to create chat applications with minimal effort. So with having said that, you can go to the link in the description below to go to this website. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit up sign up, and we're going to sign up to whatever email you want. Now, once you signed in, you'll see this dashboard. And from here, we can create new project, and we can create our own title. And here, I'm just going to say chat app. And if you look at this, we have free trials that last 30 days and plans start at $7 per month. However, I have a promo code. And by the way, I do receive commission for this. But if you use this promo code that I have, and you just write Edward right here, you'll get a free trial that will last forever. So make sure you use this promo code, or else your trial will last 30 days. So we're going to be creating a project like that. And once we have it set up, we're going to have an app that's set up with a basic. And we'll be led to this page, and we'll have a project ID as well as a private key. The next step would be to create a user, and we're just going to call this test user. And the secret, I'm just going to say 1234, 1234, doesn't really matter. I'm not going to fill any of this out. I don't need much of it. Maybe I can choose an avatar. And once I have an avatar, I'm just going to hit create person. And this is going to be a user that we've created in our project. And once we're here, we can see our chats if we want to create a new chat. And we can probably just do that and call this test chat, something like that. And we'll have a chat in our application. All right. And then with that, we can go, and I'm going to show you some of the documentation before we start. I want to show you where to find the documentation. So if I go back to ChatEngine, you can go over here and you can see the documentation over here. However, there is an updated version of this. So you want to go to React ChatEngine, and we're going to go React ChatEngine Advanced, and this will provide us a little more functionality and a little more customizability in our application using this one. So this is the documentation. You can go into the link below, make sure you see docs/React v2, and that's over here. Once we have that, you can also go to this link. This is the REST API of ChatEngine. So in cases where you want to use the API and call ChatEngine directly for more customized usability, you can go to this particular website with REST, and it'll show you the API documentation that you can use if some of the components are not doing what you need. And then over here, you can go to Storybook, and you can see all the components that this is consisting of, and I'll show you all the props of each component. But for each one, I will show you what we're going to be using. So don't worry about that unless you want to really look at this. Now, before we start coding, I want to show you one last thing, which is the customized UI section of the documentation. So if you want to change the styling or customize how the ChatEngine looks, which is something I already did, you can go to this link over here with custom CSS. There's multiple ways to do it. With render function, you can just use their pre-made render functions inside the component itself, or you can change the components and replace the components as you need, or you can just modify the CSS. And for my case, or for our cases, I customize the CSS itself. As you can see in the SAS file, it has a lot of different CSS classes that I've customized to make our website look nice. So if you want to customize it for your own needs, you can do it over here. All right, now I apologize for all that explaining, but we need to get that out of the way so we can actually start coding. So we're going to go to our app.jsx file, and we're going to start writing our imports. So I'm going to do import use state. Now notice I'm writing use state over here. This pops up, which is IntelliSense, and once you click it, it's automatically going to write your imports for you. So always make sure you're using IntelliSense. If you haven't watched my videos, I'm very big on it. Make sure you use IntelliSense because it prevents typos if you accidentally type it wrong yourself, and also saves you the headache of writing the code sometime. So from here, I'm going to do import browser router with routes. I don't know why IntelliSense doesn't pick this up for React Router DOM, but we're just going to have to write it manually. Sometimes it just doesn't work. I'm not exactly sure why. So we're going to do React Router DOM. So we're going to have that. So now we're going to be doing authentication, but we'll be doing it later in the video. So we're going to start with more of the chat application and some of the UI first, and then we'll cover some of the authentication parts. So from here inside our app, we're going to go to div class name app, and inside here, I'm going to set up browser router like so. And inside here, actually, I'm going to save it so we get proper IntelliSense or proper linting. And over here, I'm going to set routes. And inside here, I'm going to set up our route. And I'm going to set path is equal to /chat. And we're going to set element to equal a component that we have not created. And we're going to call this chat like this. And I'm going to close that. So what this is doing, we're using React Router DOM. You need to set up the browser router over here to surround the routes that we want to use. And then inside our route, this is the URLs that we can go. And this is the element that will be rendered when we go to this particular path. And now from here, we're going to be actually creating our environment variables. So I'm going to create a file called .env.local. So now if you're not used to Vite technically uses .env.local, because git ignore, we're going to be ignoring the local files, but we don't ignore .env. So you got to be careful. We're going to be using this for our local directory. And what we're going to write is we're going to do Vite base URL. And we are going to set this to a URL that we're going to set the backend to, but we haven't created the backend, but the port is going to be on 1337. So this is the URL that we will call to reach our backend. And then from here, we're going to create our Vite project ID. So now this is a project ID that we're going to grab from ChatEngine, and that's how we're going to grab the URL. So if I go to my projects back on our chat application, we can go to our settings, and you can make sure you copy your project ID over here. Make sure you don't copy mine. So just use your own API key over here. So we're going to have that, and we can save it as well. All right, with that being set up, we can go back to our app, and I want to show you one thing, and this is going to be cool to set up. So if you erase route, we don't get like the big IntelliSense that tells you that this is incorrect right here with the import. It just gives you a 3 dot showing that it might be incorrect. Now we want a better IntelliSense. So what we're going to do is we're going to install something, and we're going to open up our terminal. We're going to do npm i-d eslint and then eslint config react app. So we're going to make sure we install this. So basically we're installing the ESLint configurations that Create React App has. Vite does not have default ESLint configurations, so we want to make sure we have this. And also make sure if you don't have it installed already, you want to install ESLint, this particular extension, into VS Code so that you have the proper ESLinting going on. So we're going to close that and go to our directory again. And there's also one file that I do need to create. And I'm going to create a new file and then call this .eslint or c.json. And I need to move this into the client, make sure it's in the client folder, not the outside folder. And we're going to have a JSON object over here. I'm going to write extends : React app, like so. And we're going to save that. And now over here, now you can see all these warnings and errors that actually pop up. Now we can see chat has not been defined, and we are going to be creating that, but we just haven't gotten to that. But our ESLint is now showing, and these are showing the warnings that this is never used. It's just being read. Same with this. So ESLint will help us with a lot of problems that we might have. So with our IntelliSense set up, now we can create our component. But before we do that, let me explain some code architecture. So here in our client folder, we're going to, inside our source directory, I'm going to create a folder called components. Now, typically in a normal code base, I usually have a folder called components and then scenes and then a state. We're not going to have a scenes folder because this code base is not going to be so complicated. We need those separations. But generally, you can just have a components folder if your code base is small enough. Because just remember, code-based architecture, just because one app is set up in this particular way doesn't mean it's the right fit for another application. Just remember that architecting code bases is as simple as making it easy to find what you're looking for. So the whole idea is if you have lots and lots of files, let's imagine you have 1,000 files and components, and they're all on one level of components and they're not nested. That would make it very difficult to find a component you're looking for if there's like 1,000 files in here. So you want to, in that case, you can create more folders to separate and organize what you're looking for. However, if you have other cases where you're nesting too many files into each other, you're going to have to dig deep into 20 different folders just to find what you're looking for. That's also a problem. So you always want to make sure that your components has a decent length or a decent number of files, but not too many. It's always a balance between too many files and too many folders. You don't want to over-organize, you don't want to under-organize. So you always want to make sure you have that right balance. And that's the basis of code architecture. And generally you split code architecture between UI components, which is like the front-facing elements, versus the state components, things that hold the data, because those require separation of architecture and helps manage your state. So hopefully that makes sense. I know I'm not giving you any visual examples here, but it's kind of hard to show that. But either way, in our code base right here, we're just going to create a folder called components, and I'm going to create a folder in here, and we're going to call this chat. And in here, you can see that's kind of nested. If I open this up, you can see that's kind of nested. For the sake of my own sanity, I like not having to deal with that. So I'm just going to create another folder called login, which is something we'll create later. I'm not going to touch it right now, but now you can see we have a components folder and we can see the chat right here. And inside here, I'm going to call this index.jsx, and this will be our chat application. So now if you remember our VS Code extension, if I do RFCE, this will pop up a default component based on the file name. And we're going to call this actually chat. All right. And then from here, we're just going to make sure we test it. I want to just make sure we see the components from here. So we're going to go to app.jsx. So I'm going to import chat from component/chat, and we're going to save it. And I want to see if we go to, let's make sure our server, oh yeah, make sure your server is running. So we're going to do npm run dev. You run our server. It seems like we are seeing nothing. And I think that's actually expected. Yeah, that is expected because we are using React Router DOM, and routes are not set up for the default page. But if we go to /chat, we can now see our chat component like this. So voila, everything's working. Now, if you see this URL, this is fine. Like, this is not hard to read for the import, but we can make this easier to always start from the source directory. So sometimes we might have a situation where it goes like this, goes like this. You need to constantly just go through different folders just to figure out what you're looking for. And that's kind of very messy. So we're going to be setting up one last thing for our Vite configuration, and that is going to be setting alias for our default path. So the way to do this is I'm going to close out our terminal. So we're going to cancel this out over here. Make sure it's clear so we have nothing in there. I want to show you that we can install npm i-d at types/node. Make sure it closes so it's not very distracting. So this will allow us to go to our Vite config over here, and we can import path from path like this. And once we have that, we can go to resolve. Actually, let me close this so we have more space and you guys can see better. So we have resolve over here, and I'm going to write alias. And over here, I'm going to do square brackets and then curly braces. I'm going to do find : at replacement : path.resolve dash underscore dunderscore is what this is called if you have two underscores, dir name, comma, source. Now it's a little complicated, but basically all it's doing is we're just going to find anytime we see an at configuration, we're going to replace it with our current folder directory that leads up to our source directory. That's all it's doing. We're going to save that. We're going to save that, and then we're going to go and create a new file inside our client directory, and we're going to call this jsconfig.json. And inside here, all I need to do is do compiler options, : and then we're going to set paths, : and do @/star : ./source, comma, or /star. So this will set up our path so that we can go to app.jsx and I can do this with an @ instead. So now if we have a lot of nested folders, this will help us significantly. All right, and once we have that, I'm just gonna run our server just to make sure everything's working. So I go to this page, we can see our chat is still there, so it's working as expected. I'm gonna open up the console in our web dev inspector, make sure there's no errors. So make sure you see that and check there's no errors over there. We're gonna close this and we're gonna move on to the next thing. All right, and then from here, I'm gonna close out all of this except for index.jsx. And over here in our chat component, we're going to be importing a number of things. So I'm going to import use multi-chat logic. So as I mentioned, React Chat Engine Advanced is where we are getting this from. So in our documentation, this is what we need. And we're also going to import multi-chat socket and multi-chat window. And I'll show you what each of these will do. So over here, I'm going to create the chat props using use multi-chat logic like this. And inside here, we need to pass in a few things. So the first thing I'm going to import is the project ID we set up in the .env.local over here. So Vite project ID. So the way to import using Vite is going to be import meta.env.vite project ID. So this will configure, or this will grab this environment variable over here. Oops. And it'll allow us to use that in our use multi-chat logic. And then from here, we need the user of the React Chat Engine that we created. And in our case, we're going to have it dynamic later on once we have authentication. But for now, just to see, we have our test user. We're going to be using this. So we're going to set this to be, test user like so. We're going to hard code this for now so we can have access and create the chat application first. And then the third argument that this takes is going to be the password of this user. So I just made it simple, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this will give us the chat props and authentication that we need to connect to our ChatEngine project. All right. And then from here, I'm going to do the one styling I do need is I'm going to set this flex spaces to be 100%. And I'll cover what this will do so we can take the full width of the entire window. And inside here, I'm going to erase the chat and I'm going to put multi-chat socket like so. And the only thing we actually need to pass into this socket is for us to connect, and we're just going to pass in chat props. So this will render our component and it'll give us authentication that will provide us to connect to React Chat Engine website. And then from here, I'm going to create multi-chat window. And this is where we're going to actually do a lot more logic with creating the components and styling it. So I'm also going to pass in chat props because this one also needs it. And if you take a look, we're just going to have a style and we're going to set the height to be 100 viewport height. So it takes the entire height of the application. And we're going to do render chat header. And this will basically allow us to customize the header of our component. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to write header like that. And we're going to pass in, we're actually going to pass in the chat prop that this passes in from here. All right. So now you may be wondering where I'm getting all this information and how you can customize it if you want to customize it yourself. And we're just going to go back and I have all the links loaded up over here. If you go back to the React Chat Engine Advanced section, you can see in the Overview tab, you have the component and the socket. So I have the socket over here and then the component over here. So generally with the socket, you don't have to do that much. But with the chat window, this is where we can do much more styling and customization of how it looks and how it works. So this part right here, render chat header, you can get that information over here when you see how it works. You can see there's a lot more information on how to do this, but you can also go to the components list to show you what each part represents. So if I go down, you can see render chat header. That represents this section. And if I want to customize it, I can do render chat header and I can customize my own version. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing with this header component over here. So this will replace this particular component. We'll have a lot of the same things, so we don't have to render and customize every part of this chat application, but we're going to be customizing parts of it so we can use. All right, so with that, I'm going to go back to our app, give us more space over here, and then I'm going to import header from @/components/header. We haven't created this yet, but as you can see with the again, that means we always start from the source. So we don't have to do something messy that looks like this. We can just always start from so we know where it starts from. It's just a cleaner way to do these things. And sometimes it can get very complex when you have a big code base. So here I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this custom header. And inside this file, I'm going to call this index.jsx again. And actually this should be, this should actually be custom header like that. So make sure you fix that. So we can go over here and it goes to this location. So over here, I'm going to do rfce again to get our component basically. So in here, we're going to import a number of things. And now we installed React Hero icons. And we're going to be using some of the icons that they have. So I'm going to use chat, bubble, left, right icon, phone icon, and we're going to grab it from, @hero icons /react /24/solid. So now where I'm getting this from is you can get this from heroicons.com and you can check what we're looking at over here. So chat, bubble, left, right icon. So I'm using this one right here. So the way to do this is always just copy the text of the name, left, right, and then you just have to add an icon and you can import depending on whether you want solid or outline. So I'm using the solid version. So I'm over here making sure you're importing from the solid, and this is the size of the icon that you're using. So inside here, I'm going to run and add some divs like so. And I'm going to give this a class name of chat header. So now, again, just a reminder, I have all this styled for us. So chat header. So .chat header is going to represent a lot of items of flex, center, space between, padding. I'm not going to cover this. You can look at the CSS that you've copied over and you can see what's happening with that. And over here, I'm going to set the class name to be flex between, which is essentially doing a flex and making sure everything's aligned separately from each other. And I'm going to pass in chat, bubble, left, right icon, and I'm going to give this a class name of icon chat, like so. And over here, I'm going to set the h3 like this with the class name of header text and pass in. Over here, this is something I've forgotten. We want to make sure we're passing in chat over here. And with that, we can access the chat.title using that particular prop. And then from here, I'm going to create another div, and we're going to create a class name of flex between like this. And I'm going to pass in phone icon, class name with icon phone like this. I'm going to give this a paragraph tag. I'm going to call this class name header text. And I'm going to say chat.description like so. Also, one thing we want to do, because of some warnings that we don't really need to worry about, we're going to go to our main.jsx and we're going to remove the strict mode. We don't really need strict mode and it has no bearing on what the application will do. So we're going to get rid of that. Now we can get rid of that. So if we go to our Vite application, you're going to see that in small screens, we're going to have this configuration, but on bigger screens, we can now see our chat application. If you look at this, everything is similar to what you would see on the documentation. Very similar. We just changed some of the colors, or at least I changed the colors with the CSS. So we have a darker theme. There's some nuances that we'll need to fix, but if you take a look here, this is our header. And that is everything we set up here when we went to index.jsx. This is what this header is representing. It customized this, replaced the header, and now we can render out this particular thing. Now with this, one of the weird things about our header right now is because of these little arrows. So basically this shows up when you haven't selected a chat. So we're gonna have to kind of customize what we're doing. So I'm gonna use console log chat, and I'm gonna say chat description just to see what we're dealing with. So description like so, and we're gonna save it. So by the way I did this, I'm using a console log extension. I believe it's called Rocket, I believe. Or sorry, Turbo Console Log. So this is what you're looking for. And what it allows you to do is just highlight over here. I'm just going to press Control Alt L, and that will console log whatever you're highlighting over. So make sure you have that if you want to use what I'm doing. And once I have that saved, I'm going to open up our terminal or a console log over here. And we can see that we kind of have some of these arrows as our text. So what we're going to do is I'm going to write chat.description. If that's equal to our arrows like this, or at least if it's not equal to our arrows, then we render out what we've already written. So let me actually close this so we have more space. And we're going to do a ternary operator. And I'm going to close it like that. So if it's not equal to this, then we render out our description. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to show P over here, and we're just going to write no chat selected. Like so. We're going to save that. And I need to make sure we close. And then we can see we have no chat selected over here. So now you can probably have a more elegant solution to make it look better on smaller screens, but generally you don't have to worry about that, since generally they'll have like a full screen that they're using. So it's going to look more like this. All right, then from here, I'm going to erase our console log. I'm going to save it. I'm going to close our app.jsx as well as the custom header. And now we can go back to our index.jsx, and we're going to be customizing another component. So this is where it's going to be most of the functionality. So we want to be able to do a lot more things for our message form, but we're going to first style it out first. So we're going to do render message form like this. And this one is going to take a props value. And here I'm going to return something called standard message form. So this is a component that we have not created yet, but we will. So we're going to do props over here. I'm going to pass in props here, but we also need to know the active chat. We want to have the props and the information of the currently active chat. So to do that, we're going to do active chat like so, and I'm going to pass in chat props dot chat like so. And this is where we are going to create our component. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to import standard message form from @/components/custom message form, plural. And I'm going to do standard message form. We're going to have multiple of these forms, and they're going to be different forms for different purposes. And like I mentioned in the intro, we're going to have AI generated messages or AI response by an AI bot. All right. The first thing is I'm going to create a folder in the components directory. Actually, make sure I save this. So I'm going to create a new folder over here, call this custom message forms. And I'm going to create a file called standard message form JSX. The reason why this is not index.jsx is because we're going to have multiple of these custom message forms. So we're going to have multiple of these files. So I'm going to use RFCE again with standard message form. And we're going to make sure we have this all set up and it's working. So I'm going to save it. And it seems like it doesn't seem to exist. All right, so I found out why it's showing that, and I just restarted it. I saved it, I restarted. If you need to, you can restart the server. This is the one thing I don't like about Vite. Sometimes it just doesn't reload properly. I'm not exactly sure. Create React App never had this problem, but basically I just saved this, I restarted it, and then it's now working. So make sure you can restart it because this URL was correct. All right, with this, we can double check our application. It's having our standard message form existing over here, and now we can see it. However, we want to customize this to look a little bit different. So we're going to have, this is our final application. We have a send a message. We're going to have an attachment that we can add files, and then we have a send. So it's styled a little bit differently, but we're also going to customize the submit so it can do various things. So we're going to go back to our code. I'm going to close this, close that, close our terminal over here. And inside our application, I'm going to do const message set message. So this will save the message that we are going to be using. I'm going to pass in use state over here. So again, use IntelliSense for that. And we can just pass in a string inside use state. And over here, I'm going to do const attachment and then set attachment like so. I'm going to pass in use state again and pass in an empty string over here. Now I'm going to save it. I'm also going to have one more. We're going to set preview and then set preview. So this will be the preview image that we want. And this will be an empty string as well. Over here, I'm going to say class name with a message form container. So this will be the outer container to contain our div. And we're going to start by adding the preview. So we're going to implement the preview section. So what I'm looking for, I'm going to go back to our image over here. I'm going to choose a random image of these speakers over here. And now you can see our little preview, and it has an X mark that we can cancel out if we want. So this is our preview and what it's doing. So if I go back to my code, I can go to our preview. I'm going to write div, and I'm going to close this div as well. And inside here, I'm going to say class name message form preview. Inside here, I'm going to pass the image, and we're going to do class name with message form preview image. And again, this is not a CSS video. So we're going to do source preview in brackets like that. Actually, it should be singular. And I'm going to do on load. We're going to pass in URL.revoke object URL preview. I'm going to close this like that. So now what this onload is basically doing is it just frees up resources when you don't need the image anymore. So this is just kind of a nuance when you're using it for something like the preview. So we want to make sure we have that. And now we're getting a warning. And thankfully with our talent sets, it's going to tell us that we need an alt tag. And I'm just going to have this as the same as the class. And we're actually just going to remove the image. So I'm going to save that. And now it's going to be split onto different lines, and then we don't have a warning anymore. I'm going to get an import icon from xmark icon. So that's the close icon. I'm going to close this. I'm going to pass in a class name, message form icon x like so. I'm going to write on click. We are going to remove the preview like so. And we're also going to remove the attachment. And we're going to save that. So that should establish our preview of our image. I'm going to save that. So right now, if you look at the website, we have nothing right now. And that's because we don't have anything for our preview. So what we can do instead is we're going to create a div. And here is where we're going to actually have logic. We're just going to message form, something like that. And you can see it's already placing our text over here. We're going to go back, but we don't really need this for now. So I'm going to say class name, message form like this. And I'm going to pass in another div, and this is going to represent the input. So this is where we're going to be able to type. So I'm going to write class name, message form input container. And inside here, I'm going to write input like so. And we're going to give it a number of props. So I'm going to write class name is equal to message form dash input. So again, all the styling is done with all these class. And I'm going to give this a type of text and a value of the message that we created earlier. So right here from the use state. And over here, I'm going to do on change. And right here, I'm going to set E like this. We're going to set the message over here. So we're going to set e.target.value. And you know what? I actually want this to be separated out into a different function. So I'm going to call this handle change. I'm going to move this up here. I'm going to write const handle change. And we're going to pass that in just like that. So now it's separated from our component. And then from here, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to write place holder. And I'm going to write send a message, ... And now I'm going to save that. And we are going to double check on our website that we have that. So now the styling is not as is expected, but we'll be handling it. We can still type. So once we have the other icons, this is going to be a lot bigger. And then from here, we're going to create another div over here. And this is going to have class name of message form icons like that. And inside here, we're actually going to do the attachment. So we're going to use React drop zone. So basically, this is a package that will allow you to drop any kind of file. And in this case, we're going to drop like an image. And you're going to be able to drag it onto the UI. And it's going to be able to accept that image. And we can then upload it. So here, it's going to take accepted files. And we're going to say .jpg, .jpeg, and .png. I'm going to make sure we close drop zone, but we're going to add a few more props. So we're going to make sure we can't add multiple. So we're going to say multiple is equal to false. We're going to say no click is equal to true. And we're going to run a function called onDrop. So this is the function that will be running once we drop a file onto this particular component, and it will give us an argument of accepted files. So it's going to give us the file that we dropped onto it, and we are going to set the attachment as accepted files 0, and we're going to place it in that state. And also we're going to set preview. And if you remember, we did URL.revoke object URL. But here, this is where we're going to use URL create object URL. So this is what you have to do when you want to create some kind of object for preview. We're going to add the accepted files over here, and then we remove it once we exit out, or when we click on the X. And actually, we're going to make sure we're going to have like an inner component over here as a child. And we're going to have get root props, get input props, and then open, like so. And inside here, we're going to have a div. We're going to make sure that's closed. And we're going to have ... get root props, close that. And inside here, I'm going to have input. I'm going to put ... get input props, like this, and close it. So if you're not familiar with React Drop Zone, this is essentially what you have to do to work with this particular component. But this is basically the default. And then from here, we can kind of customize. And what we're going to add is we're going to add a paperclip icon from React Hero Icons. Make sure you use the IntelliSense to grab the import. I'm going to do a class name of message form icon clip. And on click, we're going to have it open. And we're going to make sure we close this. And we are going to save it. And with that, we can actually check if this is working. So over here, we can see we have our input, we have an attachment icon, and we can click it. Once we click it, let's add some random image, doesn't matter where. We can see the preview now. So it's being saved in our state, and then we can close it by clicking the X button. So perfect. And then from here, below our drop zone, we just want to add a little horizontal line. So we're going to do HR class name, horizontal rule. Basically, it gives us a line, but we're going to do it vertically. And we do that with CSS. So we're going to set this vertical dash line. So it's pretty simple. And then from here, I'm going to add another icon, and this is going to be paper airplane icon. So make sure you use IntelliSense so we have the import. So we're going to have a class name of message form icon airplane. And I'm going to say on click. We have this running, and then we could say set preview. And then we can pass in an empty string because we want to clear out the preview once we hit this submit button. And then we're going to have a function called handle submit, like that. We haven't created this function yet, but let's comment that out. Let's make sure everything is working. So over here, we go over here, we can write a message, we can add some random image, and we can hit submit, and it's going to clear it out. We haven't cleared out this in particular, but we can change that in the handle submit. So we can go back over here, and now we are going to be creating our handle submit function. So we can create it up here at this top. Let me close this. We're going to have const handle submit. And what we're going to do is we're going to do some asynchronous calls to the backend. So we're going to have this labeled as async. And before we go and run this function, I want to I want to add some props over here. So I'm going to add the props and the active chat. So if you go back, if you remember into our chat component, we have the props being passed as well as the active chat. And for your sake, we're just going to console log both of these out so we can see what's happening. So if I save it and open it up, right now, we don't have a particular active chat, but we do have props. We have the onSubmit function. So this is the onSubmit function that we're going to need to save and send our message to the backend. So right now, we can create our own chat. We're going to call this test chat. And we're going to have our new chat over here. And you can see that I am a member. So over here, we're going to go back and you can see I'm a member over here. And now if you take a look at our active chat prop, you can see that we now have information. And this represents the current chat that we're wondering. So admin is basically me, or the user, which is test user. And we don't have any attachment, blah, blah, blah. And people, it includes our personal user right now. So right now, this is working. But if I click this button, it's not going to do anything because we aren't handling that function. So to handle submit, we're going to be using this particular prop over here. If you see under props, maybe I can zoom this in so you guys can see a little better. So over here, we have props. And on submit, this is the function that we need to call so that we can save the message. So even if I send anything, nothing happens. So we want to make sure that's going to work. So to do this, I'm going to remove this, and in handle submit, I'm going to create a new date. So on submit requires a few properties. It's going to include attachments, created, sender username, text, and active chat ID. So that's what on submit is needing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a date. So we're going to say new date like this, and we're going to change this to ISO string. So we're going to make sure we're formatting this in the proper way. And I am going to replace the T when it comes from this ISO string. Now you can probably use a date library for this, but doing this manually is fine too. We're going to replace also Z as well. And we're going to add a time to it. So we're going to say math.floor, math.random, and we're going to multiply this by 1,000. And I'm going to say plus 00 colon 00. And actually, this should be on the outside of the curly braces. So like right there. So once you save it, it's going to format it so we have it on separate lines. Make sure I close this. And then we're also going to create an attachment. So I'm just going to call this at instead. I'm going to say, if we do have an attachment, we actually need to format this into a particular format like this. This is just what ChatEngine accepts. We need to add the attachment to something called blob. And then file is going to be the attachment name. So that will allow us to attach it to the handle submit. And I'm going to put an empty brackets if it doesn't exist, or else it'll error out. And then finally, I'm going to create the form, which is just an object. And I'm going to say attachments, and I pass in at with created. And we're going to pass in the date. And we're going to say sender user name, props.username. We're going to say text colon message, and then active chat ID, and we're going to give it active chat.id. So if you're wondering where I'm getting this information, it's all in the basically the REST API over here. You can find the on submit, and it'll give you some examples of what to send. So going back to our code, here I'm going to call the onSubmit, which is on our props. So props.onSubmit, and we are going to pass in the form. And after we submit the form, we also want to make sure our message gets emptied out like so. And I'm also going to set the attachment to empty string like so. And then finally, I'm going to go down. Since handle submit is not being called, we are going to make sure we call that. And with that, I'm going to be saving it. And now we're going to check if everything works. So we're going to go back. I'm just going to clear everything. So clear, should clear our console. And over here, we're going to do test. And I can submit, and our message gets saved. So perfect. I can also add an image. Let's add this test image, and I can send. And our image will load, and there we go. We can see our image. So perfect. Everything is working as expected. So now what we just did, if I go back to the code, what we just did is basically we created our new component and we styled it a little bit differently from the main chat engine. And the reason why we're doing that is not because so we can just style it a little bit differently. It's so that we are going to be using, we're going to have a chat, like a chat, particular chat where we can talk to OpenAI, and the OpenAI will respond to our chat message. And by doing so, we need to create our custom component and create our own handle submit. And we'll do this in a little bit, but we're going to have to now set up the backend to do so. With that being said, before we create our backend, let's actually go to OpenAI. So now OpenAI is kind of part of ChatGPT. It's the company behind ChatGPT. However, they have their own website where you can deal with their API instead of ChatGPT. ChatGPT is more of a front-end modified version, fine-tuned version of GPT model, but OpenAI has their GPT-3 model that allows us to use their basic machine learning or their machine learning capabilities, and we can use it through an API versus just a front-end interface. Now, note that ChatGPT is built on GPT 3.5, which is not available in the documentation just yet. However, they are opening up GPT 3.5 very, very soon. So this is currently the documentation for GPT 3, but GPT 3.5 is the underlying API that powers ChatGPT. So it'll be very close to what you would see. Hey, this is EdRoh from the future. I'm doing a little bit of post-editing because as soon as I say GPT 3.5 was not available, it becomes available a week after I record. So we now have GPT 3.5 available through the API. So we have the power of ChatGPT through the API documentation. If you go to this particular blog, it's going to tell you all about it. And you can go to chat completion on OpenAI documentation. And this is the documentation for ChatGPT API. So if you go down, you're going to see some slight differences. I will show you how to do them. In the final GitHub repo, there will be another file, and I'll show you where that file is so that you can use the newer version. However, this recording is still going to be using the older version, but switching over to the newer version will be easy. I suggest just following the video, and at the end, you can change the file and you can see the differences. The result will be the same, except it'll just be a more powerful version of what you see in the completed app of the current recording. Anyways, back to the video. So now make sure you sign up and log in. I have a link in the description below, and you can get a free trial from my understanding. The free trial gives you like $18 worth or something like that. I don't know if it's still the same, but that's what happened when I got it. So you can use it for free, and $18 is a lot, but make sure you realize it expires. For me, it expired. So now I am paying for the usage, but the usage is extremely cheap. Like there's no way, if you even make it to $1 a payment, you've used the API quite a bit. So even if you used it quite a bit, you can see I haven't even managed to use $1 worth. So right here, I used 1 cent so far. And I've used it a number of times just for developer purposes. I'm not using it extensively, but still, you're not going to pay that much if you're paying. So if you go back over here, you can see the API keys. Now the secret key, if you create a new secret key, you can go like this, and it'll show you the secret key. Don't worry, I'm going to be deleting this. So I'm going to copy this. This is a secret key you'll get to use. And once you have the secret key, you can never see the secret key again. You have to copy it at that point in time. So if I have this secret key, I can never see this. So if you just mess up, you can just obviously revoke the key. You're also going to have like at least one secret key, but you can just delete whichever one you want. So I'm going to regenerate, delete this key, and I'm going to be using this just for purposes of you can use this. So once we go in, now that we have the secret key, now we can set up our backend. All right, with that, I'm going to open up the terminal, and I'm going to close the server for now. And I'm going to do cd ... so I can go into the parent directory of this folder. And I'm going to create a folder called server. I'm going to go into that server for my terminal. And here I'm going to run npm init-y. So this will initialize our npm packages. So we have a package.json, and then -y represents saying yes to every prompt that it gives you, because you were just using the defaults of the prompts. Okay, and then from here, I want to create a .env file. .env, and I'm going to set the port to be 1337. So now if you remember, back in the .env.local, we set the local host to be 1337. This is going to be the port that we're going to be using. And over here, we can create our open API key like this. And I'm going to copy and paste what we had for the OpenAI key over here. And this is the secret key that we're going to be using to connect to our OpenAI or OpenAI API. And I'm going to save it. And over here, I'm also going to create a new file called .gitignore, so that when we push this repo up, we do not want this to be exposed publicly. So we want to make sure this is getting ignored. So we're going to have to add the environment variables on whatever hosting platform we set up later on. But this is for local usage only. And we need to make sure we ignore that, and we do that by the .env. We also want to ignore node modules, because usually that's too big of a packages, and the user can install the packages themselves. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to install a number of packages for the backend. So I'm going to install Express, which is the backend framework for our APIs. Body Parser, which is a simple package that will allow us to grab requests and be able to parse our bodies. And then from Course is going to be allowing cross-origin resource sharing. We're allowing that to happen. .env will allow us to read the environment variables that we just created. Helmet is just going to be giving us a little more security on our APIs. Morgan will allow us to log anytime the API gets called. It's just going to automatically give us information. And those are the packages that we want to start by installing. And while it's installing, we can go to package.json, and we can add some scripts. Or we can add type :module. So generally, when you have a node, you can only use, require, because ES5, because that's ES5 syntax, but type module allows us to use ES6, which is using the import. I mean, not necessarily ES6 per se, but it allows us to use the importing system that ES6 has. And then from here, we have the scripts, and I can write dev like so, and I can write nodemon index.js. So we haven't installed NodeMin, which is the next thing I want to do. So I'm going to do npm i dash capital D. So we want to install this as a dev dependency. So it only exists in the development environment. So here I'm going to write NodeMin like that. So the packages will be created in a separate little property over here. And it seems like, okay, so I did mess up. I'm going to not save this because I installed it, but also changed this. So I have to rewrite the type like this. Yeah, the reason why that happened is because I installed it and then added dev dependency over here, but I also tried to change it at the same time. So it's going to cause a conflict. So I'm rewriting what I wrote. So dev, and I'm going to have nodemin index.js. So now I can save it. This will be able to run our index.js file that we have not created yet. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to create a new file and call this index.js. And in here, I'm going to do a lot of imports and I'm going to be setting up our server. So to do that, let's do import express from express like so. And then I'm going to import body parser from body parser. And we should use IntelliSense. So import cores from cores. This one doesn't seem to pop up. I'm going to import .env from .env. Import helmet from the helmet package. Import Morgan from the Morgan package, like that. And then also I'm going to create a comment, say configurations. And I'm going to use .env .config. I'm going to run our app. So this is a lot of just boilerplate code that you generally just have to write. It's generally the same, usually every single time, especially for these packages. But these are one of those things you just have to set up once, and then your package or your server or app is basically ready to go. So you app using express.json, and then we're going to set up helmet like so. And then for helmet, we need to configure cross origin resource policy, or else we'll be denied access to access from the same or from a different server. Then app.use Morgan, and we're just going to set the settings to be common. So this sets up the Morgan settings. Body parser has to be set up as well. We're going to set this as JSON. We're going to set a limit of 30 megabytes, and we're going to say extended is going to be true. And then we're also going to have to set up the body parser .url encoded. And I'm going to set this a limit of 30 megabytes as well. And then we're going to set extended to be true. And then I'm going to do app.use course. And then from here, we're going to make sure we start the server. So to start our server with Express, I'm going to set a port like this, set process.env.port. So that is the environment variable over here. And sometimes the environment variable might not exist. So we just want to make sure we have a backup. So 9000 will be the backup port. But primarily, we're going to use 1337 as our main. And then we're going to do app.listen. I'm going to set this as port with a callback function over here. I'm going to say console log. I'm going to put this in template strings. I'm going to say example app listening at http://localhost, and we're going to set our port. So this is just a console log showing that our server is running at this point. So to do this, I want to make sure our server is being run. So I'm going to open up our terminal, and then we can run the command that we wrote. So npm run dev. And as you can see, we have our console log, everything's running. So now there's no point going to it because it's going to show nothing. There's nothing there. So we can just cancel it for now. We just want to make sure there's no errors. So make sure you don't have any errors going from. Now, another thing we want to set up is going to be OpenAI and making sure we're connecting to our index.js with that. So I'm going to close this terminal, and there's a package that we want to use for Node. And it's a link in the description below. You're going to go to this GitHub with OpenAI Node.js, and we're going to be installing OpenAI. So this gives us more refined access to using OpenAI, and it's kind of how they want you to use it. So I'm going to do npm I with our terminal, OpenAI. And while that's installing, we can go back to the GitHub, and we can essentially copy most of this. I'm just going to copy these 2 lines. This is what we're going to be using in our routes, but we're just going to ignore that for now. So OpenAI setup is pretty simple. So over here, I'm going to just say OpenAI configuration, and I'm going to paste what I had. So this is basically the import. So I'm going to move this up, and I'm going to be changing this to an import instead. So I'm going to do import configuration, and this should be from OpenAI. Get rid of the parens. So we have that imported, and over here we have this, and we also have our OpenAI API key, which is essentially, is that correct? OpenAI API key. No, that is not correct. So make sure you have the same environment variables, and we're going to pass that in over here. And then from here, we have new OpenAI configuration. This will allow us to basically call our routes anytime we need. So using that, we can save that, and we can be using OpenAI for our configurations. And one thing to note, I want to make sure this is exported. We're going to be using this particular variable in another folder or another file. We're going to create a route file for that. And so to do that, let me close this terminal. I'm going to close all these files. It's a little messy. Let's close all of this. And I'm going to go back to index.js. And then I want to create a new folder, and we're going to call this routes. And one of the route files we're going to have is going to be OpenAI.js. So this will represent all the routes that will point to OpenAI. Typically, we're going to usually have another folder called controllers. So that's like the standard best practice where you can put the functions of the routes or what the routes are doing into another file and place all the functions that are relevant over there. But because this is a much simpler app, it's much better to just have the routes over here. We don't really need to decouple the routes and the controllers in this case. So we're just going to have that all in one section. And again, if you remember the code architecture, like I mentioned, your code architecture is very dependent on how big your application is, how many files, and what best suits the application. So in this case, we don't need to create more files for no reason. So we're going to import Express from Express, like so. Oops. So this will allow us to use a router. And I'm going to import Axios from Axios. So we have not installed Axios. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do npm I Axios, like so. And close that. So Axios is basically a way to call APIs. This is a convenient way to do so. I'm going to pass in .env because we're going to need to use the environment variables, and you always need to configure it for each file. And I'm also going to import OpenAI. So this will grab the OpenAI file from the index.js. So I'm not exactly sure. I think you need to be very direct with what you import, but I might be wrong. But either way, this will for sure work. And then we're going to configure our .env over here. And then from here, I'm going to set up our router, and this is going to be express.router like so. So this will allow us to use our routes in a different file. So I'm going to do router.post, and the route that we want to use for this, I'm going to call this text. So this endpoint will have a /text to call. And we're going to have an async function because this is going to require some API calls. And I'm going to do a try catch block over here. I'm going to say error over here, and I'm going to say console.error. Paste an error like that, along with passing the error message, just in case it doesn't work out. And I'm going to do res.status 500. I'm going to pass in .json, and I'm going to pass our error message in our response. So this will return an error if this part doesn't work. And what we want from the body is going to be the text and the active chat ID. And I'll come back to what this will be doing. But before that, we have this router.post/text. We also need to export our router because we'll be using this in our index.js to make sure we connect it. And then once we go to our index.js file, I'm going to have a routes section, and I'm going to say app.use/OpenAI, comma, OpenAI routes, which is something we haven't defined just yet. And I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to import OpenAI routes from the routes file. So /routes, and then OpenAI.js. Make sure when you're using this, you need to identify the file type. It is not like with Vite, you don't have to ignore this, but you do have to keep these to work. So once you do that, we have this route basically set up. And actually, I messed up the capitalization, so make sure these are correct. So OpenAI routes like that. So when you want to hit this particular route right here, you're going to have to call http://localhost:1337/OpenAI and then /text. That's how you hit this particular route. So anytime you have this and it opens up to routers, this will be the parent route. So this is always going to be prefixed prior to this right here and whatever routes we want to add later. And for now, we're just going to keep it like this, and we're going to keep it simple. I want to make sure we console log the text when we get it back. And also, I'm just going to return the text that we get just for testing purposes. And we're going to be doing other stuff with it. So I'm just going to pass in text like that. So we're just basically returning the text that gets inputted. So I'm going to save that and save this as well. All right, so from here, for now, I'm going to create a new folder in our source directory. I'm going to call this state. And inside the state folder, we're going to create a file called api.js. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Redux Toolkit and Redux Toolkit Query for that matter. So what this essentially does is we are basically using Redux, except Redux Toolkit is basically a way to abstract out all the complicated boilerplate. So it's like it shortens the amount of boilerplate code that you have to write. And then the Redux Toolkit Query allows us to make API calls in a very simple way and store it in our Redux store. So by using Redux Toolkit and Redux Toolkit Query, we can make very simple API requests and then save those values into Redux Toolkit with, some differences. There's going to be some differences, but it makes it pretty convenient. So in our file api.js, I'm going to be importing create API fetch base query as well, and we're going to grab it from at redux.js/toolkit query/react. And then from here, I'm going to do export const API. I'm going to create the API. So it's essentially, we're creating the slice. That's what they call the store in, basically like a section of the store in the Redux store, basically. So we're going to have create API that allows us to do that. And then we're going to have a base query. So this will give us the base URL. And if you remember, we're going to be using the environment variable that consists of the base URL we created before. So I'm going to do import.meta.env.vite base URL. So by providing this, we can make API calls with this particular URL starting from here. So we can do the base URL localhost, and then we can do /OpenAI right here in the routes. And then we can also hit the /text as well. So we'll be doing that in the following lines. So I'm going to say reducer path, and we're going to call this main. So reducer path represents the name of this particular slice. And then tag types represent where the files are, or where the text or like the data that we're going to be saving. But in this case, we don't really need to save any kind of data. It's just going to be automatically posted into the backend servers. So we don't really need to store any data on the front end, really. We just have to retrieve the information from their API. And then from here, I can do post. I'm going to call this endpoint post AI text. So this is basically the query call that we'll be using to make an API request over here. And we're going to use build.mutation. Now I know these are all these fancy terms for Redux Toolkit Query, and that's the one thing I don't like about Redux Toolkit Query per se, is because of all the abstraction. It's not quite evident of what some of these things do, and the documentation, I will say, is a little bit confusing despite being comprehensive. This is essentially anytime we're using like a post call. That's why I prefix this post. Build mutation will allow us to make a post API call to the backend. And we're going to call this query over here. And the query will give us a payload. So we can pass in whatever payload, and I'll show you when we use this, we can pass this in over here. I'm going to create the URL, and we're going to say OpenAI/text. So that represents the URL I was mentioning before. The base URL will be prefixed onto this. And this is the URL endpoint that it calls. And we're going to call this method post, like so. And we're going to give the body of the payload that we will send to the backend. I'm going to save that. So we have that particular endpoint. And all we have to do is, if we want to actually use this API, so this is not actually calling the API. This is just creating basically the function that will call the API. So we need to have a hook. So used post AI text mutation. And it's going to come from our API component. So now actually, if you just did this first, you can just do use post, and now it will automatically pop up. But anytime you use a post mutation, it's gonna start with use and be suffixed with mutation. If you're using a get, it'll be a little bit different. So just be aware of that. It's different for using a mutation versus like a get request. I'm going to close all this. And then from here, I'm going to go to our main file, and we're going to be setting up the last parts of Redux Toolkit. So this is the only thing we really have to set up once, and it's pretty short. So first, I'm going to import provider from React Redux. And then I'm going to import configure store from Redux.js Toolkit. And I'm going to import setup listeners. As you notice, I'm writing it over here, not in curly braces, because if you do curly braces, the IntelliSense doesn't pick it up. So if I do that, it pops up. And this actually should be, from my understanding, node dist, like that. And then I'm going to import API from our ./state API. But I'm going to just do because we configured our path before. And then from here, I'm going to do export const store, and we're going to configure the store. And we're going to pass the reducer of the API.reducer path that we created like this. And we want to just pass in the reducer from the API. So this will set up the reducer that we have. And then middleware is we're going to pass in get default. And we just need to do get default.concat API.middleware. So these are just setups that you want to use, and this is by default what you need to do for Redux Toolkit and using Redux Toolkit Query. So we just want to pass it in to our reducer just like that. Set up listeners, and we're going to do store.dispatch. And the last thing is around this app, we're going to set provider store is equal to store like this. I'm going to make sure we close this over here. And once we save it, this will essentially allow us to use Redux Toolkit. So not even that bad. We've already set up Redux Toolkit, but just creating this API slice, we created an endpoint that we want to call, and then we are setting up this configuration of the store, and that's all we need to do. And now if I go to our components, we can then use this particular hook and make an API call essentially. We're going to be using this use post AI text mutation in a new component over here. I'm going to call this AI.jsx, and I'm going to use RFCE to create our boilerplate code for this. And what we want to do is we're going to have most of the JSX and the UI elements from the standard message form, and we're going to be reusing them in the AI JSX. However, there's going to be some custom logic that we don't want from this same component. For example, the handle submit. We want our own handle submit that's going to hit our backend instead of the ChatEngine backend, and we want to be able to call OpenAI on our backend using our own version of the handle submit. So to do that, we are going to take out most of these elements, and we're going to create a new component as well, and we're going to call this message form UI.jsx, and we're also going to use the RFCE to create the boilerplate. So I'm going to save that. So now if you're thinking about reusability and reusability with components in React, this is like a prime use case because we're going to be using this particular standard message form in multiple locations. Now, I always recommend some people, when you first start, the temptation is to make everything reusable. But you have to understand when you make something reusable, it's very time consuming and takes a lot of effort to make components reusable, especially if you're using like some massive form and you have a second massive form and you're trying to make that massive form reusable, even though the forms are very different, then you're going to waste time trying to make that one component that's extremely reusable. And then if you never use that component again, you just waste a lot of time. So you always have to consider when you're truly reusing a component. I've seen so many people just waste so much time just by trying to make things reusable. I've had to build tables that are reusable in like 20 different locations, but sometimes it would have just been better to just build separate tables for certain situations. Sometimes making things reusable is not as easy as it seems. So it doesn't always save you time. So you have to be very careful of what you make reusable. People over abstract, and it's a huge problem I've seen. It's always over as to keep your code dry. That's one thing, but trying to make everything dry as possible is not always the best option. Anyways, forget my rant. Let's go to message form UI. I'm going to go and paste everything that was in our standard message form over here in our message form UI. So now we just have a lot of squiggly errors. So we're going to have to go back and we're just going to go and copy and paste everything up here. So I'm just going to paste it. We have useState, we have all of these, but now in this, we want to be able to pass some props in here so that we can definitely change and have different versions of the message form UI depending on the component that we want. So we're going to do set attachment message handle change handle submit. So we want to be able to show all of this, but also I'm going to pass in preview inside because this is going to be universal throughout multiple components. So I'm going to do useState like that and pass that in, and we shouldn't have any errors after that. So notice I didn't change anything in here particularly. I just added some props over here so we can pass them in. So if we're going to use message form UI, we can pass in the proper properties. So notice I'm passing in handle submit so that we can have different handle submits depending on the component that we're using. So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import message form UI, and I'm going to just grab all of this and place in our message form UI like this. And what we want to do is going to pass in set attachment message as well, and then handle change. I'm going to pass in the handle change we had, like so, and then handle submit, as well as handle submit over here. So we're going to keep this handle submit the same, and everything else we're just passing in. We do not need preview anymore, so we could just delete that. And then the standard message should be exactly what it was before. Now we do have some warnings, so we'll just get rid of this because we're not using them in this particular component anymore. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to open up my terminal right now. My website is running, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to refresh and make sure we don't have any errors in our console. So let's go back to console. We can see no errors. Everything is working as expected. Is it working? And let's send it. And as you can see, it's still working. All right, so I'm going to close this out. And now I want to do the same exact thing for AI right here. So now we can use the same component that we've done or we used before. And we could just pretty much go down over here in our standard message form. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to close this over here. And I'm going to paste it inside our return. And I'm going to make sure we import message form UI as well. And for now, I'm going to go back. I'm just going to copy and paste all of this. And we can just make sure we have a React and useState over here. We're going to paste that in. So now we'll have most of what we need. So we also need to pass in the AI and the components and the props, because if you see standard message form has these props over here, we need to make sure we pass that in. So now we haven't used this particular component, or it's not being rendered out anywhere. So what we're going to do, and to pass that in, so we're going to go over here, or we're going to make sure we save it. We want to go to the chat folder, go to our index.jsx, and we want to take a look over return. This is rendering out our standard message form, but we need a conditional where we render out this particular component, AI component, instead in certain conditions. So the way we are going to do it is we're going to depending on the chat title, like the name of the chat room, we're going to render out different components. So the way we do this is we're going to grab the chat props dot chat, if it exists. We need that conditional just in case. And then we do starts with AI chat. So if the title of the chat room starts with AI chat, then we're going to render out our AI component. So depending on the title, we are going to have a different component or different functionality for our send function. And we also make sure we have to pass in our props as well as our active chat. Now, of course, you can change the functionality depending on whatever your use case or whatever you would like to do. But in this case, we're just going to go by the title, which makes it kind of easy. So from here, I'm going to import AI from custom message forms. Now I'm going to change this to, even though it's a little longer, I'm going to change this to components like that because it's just cleaner that way. Without all the dots, it's hard to know where it's coming from, but with the @/components, it makes it kind of easy to understand what's happening. So we're going to save that. And as you can see with the handle submit, we still haven't changed anything over here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the use post AI text mutation. Finally, we haven't done any API calls yet, but this is how we can make an API call using this particular hook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const trigger, and I'm going to set use post AI text mutation, making sure I'm using the IntelliSense to import it as well. So there's a difference between if you use Redux Toolkit Query, this is a little different. If you're using a get call or a get query or something that just reads information, this will look a little different. It'll just be like use get something query instead, and it will, instead of returning an array where you destructure an array, you would be destructuring object instead, and it'll be called data. So you would grab the data information. However, we're using mutation so that we have a trigger, and this is a function that will trigger the actual call. And we want to be able to trigger that call in our handle submit function. And so most of this is going to remain the same. So we're going to have blob attachment. We're going to pass that into our attachment over here with the date, the username, message, and active chat ID. The only difference is that we're going to both submit our message, but we're also going to trigger our API call. And our API call in the backend, if you remember, we're going to be calling OpenAI. And OpenAI will submit a message, or we are going to get OpenAI to grab a message or respond to the message that we have, and then send it back and post it as another, like a chatbot user. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I go back to my completed application over here, so if I go to AI chat test, I would say, how's it going? And if you wait a little bit, AI bot Steve responds, it's going well, thanks for asking. So basically, this is a response coming from OpenAI. So basically what I'm doing is I'm grabbing this information, I'm submitting it to OpenAI, and then OpenAI will come back with a response. And in the backend, we are going to post this as a different user and submit a message on the chat application. So it feels like you're talking to OpenAI or a bot. But before we create the chat room and test that out, we need to create the logic on the backend now. But first, I want to say we trigger, and we want to submit the form to the backend, and just to test if that is working. So essentially, what we're doing right here was we're grabbing this form, we're sending it with the trigger, which means it triggers this particular endpoint in the API file, and it's sending the payload to our URL. So in the body of our post API call, we're sending the form data. So but we're basically sending this particular form information to the backend. And let's make sure everything is working. So we're going to go and open up our terminal, make sure our server is running with npm run dev. And let's go and create a new chat form. And we're going to call this AI chat. So it's case sensitive, so I got to make sure everything's correct. So if you go back to chat, I said AI chat underscore, so that needs to start with that. And test, we're just going to create it. and we have our test application, and we're just going to say hello, and it's going to create the message, but also we should be hitting the back end as well. So right now we're essentially grabbing, let's see. Yeah, if I open over here, we're just grabbing the text for now. So that's all we're sending to the back end at the moment. Actually, sorry, that's not all we're sending, but I mean, we're just grabbing the text from our form. So this form it provides all this information, but we don't need all this information. We just need essentially the text and the active chat ID. So right now, everything is working as expected. And as you can see right here, this is just a response from Morgan. Morgan is logging these messages. It shows you when the API endpoint has been hit, and the status code is 200, which means it's a success. So it shows you which endpoints we're hitting and gives you information. So it's pretty useful to have that on. Hey guys, this is EdRoh from the future again with some post editing. So the following section you're going to see me build this OpenAI.js file, and you're going to see something like this: await OpenAI.createCompletion. Just note that this is old GPT-3 versioning. Now, if you want to use GPT 3.5, in the routes folder, I have a file called OpenAI-new.js. So in this file, I have a comment right here that you can uncomment out, and this is basically everything you see in the video except upgraded for 3.5. Now, most of the code is pretty much the same. There's going to be slight differences like create chat completion versus create completion, and you're going to see model and you're going to see messages. I wrote a lot of notes that you can see and read to see the differences that you might see with GPT 3.5. Now the video is going to go through using GPT 3. You can follow that, but at the end you can just copy this over on the GitHub repo, replace this file with this code, and it should work exactly the same. So most of the code is going to be the same with minor changes. And what you'll see in the result is that if you see right here, what I did some testing, and this is essentially right here. This is a result of some of the ChatGPT versions. So they are much more, it explains things much more clearly and with a lot more detail versus, hi, how's it going over here? And it says, it's going well, thanks for asking. This is the old version. It's much more straightforward, and it doesn't really spend the time to explain things. So this verbose model is the newer ChatGPT version, and it does sound a little more cheeky in my opinion. So you can do some stuff with that. But anyways, let's go back to the video. Just wanted you to note that this is what's going to happen in the future sections. All right, so in our code, in our backend, we're now going to make the OpenAI call, or we're going to be writing the code that will make the call. So I'm just going to delete this console log, and over here, I'm going to write response is going to be equal to await OpenAI.createCompletion. So this is coming from the package OpenAI that we created earlier. So this is basically going to make our API call to OpenAI for us. And all we need to do is submit the properties that we need to complete this response. And the first thing we want to do is get the model. So text DaVinci 003. So now I'll give you a brief rundown of some of the OpenAI and the parameters that you're going to have to send. So over here, if you go to the playground section of OpenAI, so this is right now I'm in the docs. If you go to the playground section, you can see all the models that are available to us that we can use. Now the difference between all of these models is pretty subtle, but the text DaVinci 003 is GPT-3, and basically it is the one that you most likely want. It is the most accurate and the most recent version. So if you see DaVinci 002, that means it's an older version. Now these other ones, Curie, Babbage, ADA, now these are all in a way a more inferior version of DaVinci. However, these do have use cases because they're cheaper. So if you ever use a situation where you're just classifying something or doing different things, these are the models that you would use. So you can save more money on these models. And you can even show more models and see other versions, but these are generally not what they recommend. But you can see all their information on the models section of these documentation. So it'll explain what you use every single one for. But for the most part, if you're just experimenting, text DaVinci 003 is the one you want. It is the most expensive, but it's still quite cheap. And then from here, the next thing we're going to add is going to be the prompt, which is just a string. So this is the string that we're going to be using. And then over here, the next element is going to be temperature. So temperature is pretty easy to understand. So if you have higher values, it will make it more random, while lower values will be more focused. Now, if you understand machine learning, generally you can kind of see it as a creativity factor, but it's not always a creativity factor. It's just more random when it comes to higher values. And lower values is just, you're more likely to get repeated values and a more strict definition of, like a more accurate version of what you would, like a response. It will directly answer your question, or it will directly address your concerns. So it won't try to be creative, or it won't try to do anything random as well. And then max tokens is the next thing we're going to have, but max tokens determines how long you need the context. So for example, the response, the length of it is going to be determined how much max tokens. There is a limit to how much you can get. So 4096 is the maximum amount. In our case, we're just going to use 2048. And then top underscore P is very similar to temperature. You can only use one or the other. But you generally, I mean, you could put both, but you generally don't want to change both. And then there's also, let's see, frequency penalty. This is the one that you just don't want to make sure, like, you tell it not to repeat itself as much as possible. Presence penalty is another thing we do. Penalize new tokens based on whether they appear in the text so far. So these all indicate whether you want new responses. So now a lot of these parameters, you can play around with it. I would say they give a decent change, but most of the time it's dependent on the prompt. So the prompt is by far the most impact of what you can get. So we're going to start by writing our prompt. I'm going to write text. So we're passing in the text that we're grabbing from the front end. We're going to pass in temperature. We're going to set that to 0.5. We're going to set max tokens to be 2048. And notice it's in snake case, so underscore instead. And then we're going to do top P, and we're just going to set this to 1. We're going to grab frequency penalty, and we're going to set that to 0.5. Presence penalty to be 0. So that is basically OpenAI and how we make an API call. And after that, we're going to await, and we're going to use Axios. And the reason why we're doing this is to make an API call to the handle submit function. So we're essentially doing what the handle submit was doing originally over here with the on submit, but we're using it from the backend. So if you ever wanted to take a look, you can go over here. This is over here in the REST page. This is where you can find the information. And if we go back, I'm going to grab https://API ChatEngine.io/chats, and I'm going to pass in active chat ID /messages/ and then comma. I'm going to pass in text as well. And if you ever look at the response, it's kind of like the response structure is a little like it's quite nested. So we usually do response.data, which is pretty standard, but then we have choices, and we want to grab the first choice. and we're just going to grab the text. So that's how you grab the text of the response. And then over here, we're going to pass in some headers, and we need to pass in project ID, username, and user secret. So I'm going to say project-ID, and we haven't defined these environment variables just yet, but I will do it shortly. So essentially, a lot of these will be similar to what we wrote in the front end. So this is going to be user secret. And again, this is all mentioned in the docs, so you can take a look if you need. So bot user secret like this. And we're going to go to our environment variables, and we are going to be setting this up. So over here, I'm going to say project ID is equal to, we're going to go back to the .env.local, grab the project ID over here and pass that in. And we're going to create a bot user name. And I'm just going to call this AI bot Steve, just to know that this is the bot name. And then from here, I'm going to say bot user secret. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. So what we need to do is I'm going to grab the username, go back to ChatEngine. Over here, I'm going to go to users, and we want to be able to create a new user, and we're going to call him Steve with 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and create this person. So now this user exists, and no one's going to be able to log into this particular one. I mean, I guess you can, but you probably should have this like a different secret. But essentially, this bot will be pasting information coming from OpenAI automatically once we have the settings configured. And then once we have that information, we also want to make sure we just send the text that we get from OpenAI and return it in our API call. Even though we're not going to use that, it's more that we just want to know that this is the response we get from the text. But with that, let's actually test everything is working as expected. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to write console.log. I'm just going to paste that in over here. I'm just going to say response data like that to make sure we can see what's happening. And also, I can probably just console log rec.body. So I'm going to do that just so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to save that. And now we can go to the front end. Let's go over here. And we are in the AI chat. Hey, how is everything? I'm going to send it. And let's double check everything is working. So we do have a 500 error, it seems. So let's open this up. Something is not quite working. All right, so the reason why it's not working is there was a missing slash. So it was originally like this. So I want to make sure you have that slash. I'm going to uncomment the console error, and I'm going to save it. We have a active chat ID. There's one thing to note, that if you go to, I have a second one, but you need to add your user. So we're going to do, let's go back. I forgot his name. So if I go to .env, AI underscore bot, Steve, like that, you want to make sure you have that user in that particular chat. So if I go over here, AI chat underscore test, and I say, how is your day going? I'm going to send it. My day is going well. Thank you for asking. How about yours? So perfect. So now we have the AI bot talking to us. Perfect. So if I go under here, I'm going to make sure now I can just delete everything. If you take a look, my day is going well. This is the response that you're getting from OpenAI, and you know how to grab the text with response.data.choices like this. So I'm going to delete that now. I'm going to save it. everything should work as expected with this particular endpoint now. And so with that, we basically have our AI chat room where we can talk to OpenAI bot. It's pretty simple, not that bad. We're calling OpenAI and making sure that message gets posted as a different user. So that is perfect. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the AI code. So the next thing is going to be the code chat room. So basically it's going to be the same thing, but it's going to respond with code and complete our code if we need to. So if I do like function capitalize all letters, if I just do that, something like this, and I send it, let's wait and see. Return function if input. So we basically have all of this. Now this is not organized and formatted, but basically this will give us the code and it'll just basically uppercase everything. So this is how we can use this chat room to write code for us. All right, so let's get started. So now everything else already set up. The AI code is very, very similar to what we just did with text, but I want to show you how easy it is to set up everything now that all of this like Redux Toolkit Query, all the backend is set up. Once you want to add a new API, you'll see how easy it is now. So once we have over here, we can just go back to the API file and we can just do the same exact thing. We could actually just copy this, paste it over here, and we're just going to call this AI code like this. And then we're just going to change the text to code and keep everything the same. And over here, I'm going to do use post AI code mutation. And in our custom message forms, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this AI code.jsx. Inside here, I'm going to do, instead of actually using the template, we're actually just going to copy and paste over here everything that we have for AI. I'm going to change the name though. So AI over here. Make sure I, select both of these. I'm selecting both of them with Alt or Option, depending on your machine. So AI code will be set up like that. Now the only difference is going to be, this is going to be use post code mutation. So we're just going to change that. Actually, I'm just going to select both of them and write code mutation like so. And save it. And over here in our chat, we're going to be adding the same exact thing, except this should be called AI. AI code like that. And this should be AI code like so. Make sure we pass that in. We're going to change this to @/components. And we're going to pass that in as well. And this file, everything should essentially be the same thing. So we still have trigger. We can change this to trigger code if we want to just like really differentiate. This name can be anything really. And we should essentially be hitting our code endpoint. However, we have not created that endpoint. So we're going to go to our routes over here, and we are going to copy the /text endpoint and paste it over here. And this can just be code instead. And then from here, this model should be code right here. We're keeping the name text, even though it might be sending code, since they're both the same format. And we're going to make the same kind of post as well. And we're just going to keep everything the same. So this should be code. The only thing that really changed is the model itself. So I'm going to save that. And let's make sure all our servers are running. We can go back. We can see over here, let's create a new chat room, AI code test. Once we have that, we need to make sure our bot is in that application. So I'm going to refresh this particular page. We're going to see AI code _test. and we want to add our member. So now I know we have to do this manually, but this is kind of how you would do it, because the chat room is just, no one's going to automate adding the bot. So I'm going to grab the bot username over here. I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to save it. So now that user should be in here. I'm just going to make sure we have AI bot Steve. We could have added it over here actually, but it's fine. So once we're over here, I'm going to say function make snake case. Snake case. And let's see what it responds with. And actually we do seem to have an error. Let's look at the request failed with status code. Let's make sure. So now just remember, if you have any network issues, you can just go to the network tab in our inspector and you can check everything that's happening. So OpenAI/code seems to be the correct route. And we have a post and we're getting a 500 internal server error. So now we can go to our application, and it does seem we're getting some kind of error when we're hitting this. So let's double check what is happening. So to debug this, let's actually just console log what's happening with our response. And I'm just going to copy this instead so we can see the text to see if this is actually happening. Also, I want to make sure we have a text over here. So when you're debugging, you always want to figure out where the error is happening. So we have 3 points of possible errors right here, here, and here. We always want to console log after each part just to see which console log we are not getting. And finished request. So we just want to make sure we can see what's happening. Now, if you look at the console log, we have this very big long error, and that's coming from this console.error. I'm just going to comment that out so we can actually just see where this is having issues. So let's double check, and I'm just going to copy this again, and let's actually see. We're going to error out again, but this time we can see where we get to. So we have text function make case, and it seems like we don't even hit this particular response, so we haven't even got to this point. So let's actually debug what's happening. So now the error that was giving us back, it was saying 404 not found. Basically, it was not able to find it was not able to make this request successfully because it could not find it. And I made a lot of messages over here just to see what's happening, just to see what the error is all about. So I went over here, I did console.error, I showed error.response.data.error, and I was able to grab that from this big object over here that originally I was console erroring like this, and I was able to find the error message just to see what's happening. And I wanted to show you guys what that is. I already knew what the answer was. I just wanted to show you the message over here. And it was that the model does not exist. And I realized this over here, model code DaVinci 003, it should actually be 002 instead, just to see what's happening. Or like just to tell you that the model needs to be 003. There's no 003 version of the code model. So I'm going to go and pass this over here. I'm going to be sending it, and we are going to see that there is no error, and we're waiting for a response, it seems. And there we go. We have a really ridiculous long function. So if I were to just, wow, they added a lot of comments, and it seems like it's cut off. So if I were to go back and I did function make snake case, it would look like something like this. For a snake, interesting. I don't know what it's giving me over here, but we do have make snake case, make camel case, and it seems like there is some kind of extra configuration that it sends. But let's just delete everything over here. I just wanted to show you what it's returning. So we're going to return, and as you can see, after all that debugging, we were able to figure out what the problem was. With that, we finished the code section. I'm just gonna delete all these console logs because we don't need them anymore because we verified it is currently working. So I'm gonna save that and just close this out. All right, so the final thing we're gonna be building is going to be the AI assist. So this chat room is going to allow us to have an autocomplete of what you're trying to write. So if I write, can you help me with my, and then I just hold off, it's going to give us information that will autocomplete. And if I hit tab, it's going to complete it and grab that information. Would you be, and then if I do it again and I press backspace, it's going to remove that auto suggestion. So this one's a little more involved. So if I go back, I'm going to just start with the API file. And over here, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to call this post AI assist and change this to assist over here. And I'm going to change this to use post AI assist mutation. And if I save it, we can go on to our custom message form. So to create our component, I'm going to go to our custom message form. I'm going to create a new file called aiassist.jsx, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the information from AI code, copy everything, and paste it over here. And I'm going to grab this AI code section, change this to AI assist. And I'm going to go back up, change this used post AI code mutation. I'm going to change this to assist to grab the information that we were using. And this is going to be trigger assist. So this one's going to be a little bit different from the other ones, but we should be able to do what we need to do. All right. So the way this is going to work is that when we type a few characters, we're going to wait for the user to stop typing for a little bit for it to autocomplete, because we don't want to send an API request on every key press that the user does. We want to make sure that after a few seconds and making sure when they stop typing, that's when we'll send an API request. So we're going to use something called debouncing to do this. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to go back to our code. I'm going to remove trigger code form because we're not doing anything with handle submit. This should be what you would normally do by default. However, we're going to create a new value called debounced value, and we're going to use a hook that we will create, and we're going to call it use debounce, and we're going to send a message every 1,000 seconds. And up here, we're going to create a function, and we're going to call this use debounce. And it's going to have a value and a delay to represent this is the message and this is the delay. And in this use hook, we're going to do debounced value like so. We're going to set debounced value, and we're going to have use state. And I'm going to pass in the value. So this is the value that will be debounced and the message we sent. And then from here, I'm going to use effect. Make sure we use IntelliSense. And inside here, we'll have a call. And we're going to say const handler. And we're going to set timeout. And inside this, it's going to be another callback function. And we're going to set debounced value of the value. And we're going to have it delay every few seconds like this. So this is a handler function. And this is basically what's going to allow us to debounce. However, whenever you create a use effect for something like this, we also want to return, and we want to make sure we clear the timeout. So we're going to use clear timeout, and we're going to pass in our handler. So this is so we don't have any problems when we don't close it out. And over here, I'm going to pass in the value and delay for use effect to trigger anytime these two values change. And after this, I'm going to return the debounced value as well. So this is our use debounce function that will handle the set timeout. And then from here, I'm going to go down. I'm going to have a use effect, another one as well. And if debounced value does not exist, we're not going to do anything. Otherwise, we're going to grab the form and we're going to put it into an object, the form that we need. And we're going to use trigger assist to pass this form in. So making sure if once we have a debounced value, that's when we're going to make an API call. And we want to make sure we trigger this with the debounced value as well. Now we're missing a few dependencies, but we only want this to happen when the debounced value occurs. So instead, we're just going to do ESLint disable line. And we can write exhausted depths, but I forgot what the particular linting error is. So that is our debouncing. However, that still won't cover the extra text that pops up. So if I write, can you help me? There is a string that pops up behind this input, and it's in basically grayed out characters. So the way to do this is that we're basically having two inputs right on top of each other. It's just one of them is in front, which is this one. This is in the back. And this second one has the added extra information. Otherwise, the second one has the identical. It also has can you help me? So we are positioning it in the correct spot. But the understand is added onto the second one, while the first one just has can you help me? So that's kind of how this kind of works. So it's a little tricky with CSS. You need to place something on top of each other, and you're having two inputs right on top of each other, masking one of them, essentially. So the way we do this, we're also going to have to handle the handle key down. Basically, when you hit tab or enter, we are going to use that autocomplete message. So we're grabbing the second one. We're replacing the first one with the second one. That's what we do when we hit enter and tab. So the way to do this is we're going to have a function called handle key down. And this will effectively be put on the input, and we will pass in into the on handle key handler. And in this, we're going to have an event, and we're going to say handle, enter, and tab. And basically, in this function, we're going to grab the event handler, and it's going to be e.keycode is equal to 9, and e.keycode is equal to 13. So these two characters of enter and tab is represented by 9 and then 13. And we also want to make sure that the page doesn't refresh, so we're going to do e.prevent default, and we are going to set the message, which we haven't created yet. Or actually we did. I believe we did. Yeah. So we have the original message over here. We're going to set the message to be a message plus a second text, and it's going to be append text like this. So append text is going to be another state that we're going to add. So if I come over here, I can do append text, set append text. And this is going to be the extra appended text to our input. So when we hit enter and tab, we're adding this appended text to that particular input. So that will help us add the autocomplete functionality. And then after this, we're going to set the appended text to be empty to clear it out. And then finally, we're going to have another final use effect. And it's okay to have like multiple use effects. This serves one purpose, which is the debouncing. This serves the append text purpose. And we're going to say if result assist.data.text, if that exists, we are going to set append text to be that particular value. So I'm going to grab this and pass it in there. And over here, I'm going to have result assist, like so. And I'm going to do ESLint disable line, like so. So now what is result assist? So now what this result assist is going to come back from our backend. So right here in our use post assist mutation, we can grab the result that comes back from our backend using result assist. So when we trigger the assist, we're going to wait for the response to come back with information, and we're going to use this information to replace our append text. So this is going to be the completed result from OpenAI once we grab it from the backend. And then we can append that to the original message using handle key down. So this is where we set it. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot of steps to this. It's a little more confusing than you would think, but it's a cool effect. So we're going to write append text and we're going to pass this in. So now we did not add this to message form UI. Message form UI does not have this functionality where we pass in the append text and we have a second input behind, but we're going to be handling that now. And we also need to pass in handle key down. So basically we've created these functionalities, but we do need to pass them in to message form UI. And only in the situation where we actually have that information, that's when we pass it in. So over here, we're going to do append text. I'm going to say handle key down. And over here, we're going to go to our input. And I want to pass in on key down. I'm going to say handle key down. So that will pass in a function that we created that will run this command, enter and tab, and I'll provide that functionality to this particular input. And then also, we only have one input, but we don't have the input for the autocomplete before we hit enter or tab. So we want to say, hey, if there is an append text in this component that's being passed down, we are going to give another input like so. And I'm going to give it a class name of message form assist. So this basically will color it slightly different and making it a little more gray. We're going to say type is equal to text. We're going to say disabled. So disabled will give it so that you can't really type on it. And that's how we can mimic the input without it interfering with the original input. And then here we're going to pass in the value, and we are going to pass in message with append text, like so. So this one will actually have the message and the append text attached together. So with that, I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to work on the backend for this. So basically, we're going to run and handle this particular endpoint, OpenAI/assist, and we're going to create that in the backend. So if I go back to our routes, we can basically, let's copy the text route. So router.post/text. I'm going to go down, and under our code, I'm going to have an endpoint called assist. And then over here, in the prompt, instead of just having a text, I'm going to tell, this is basically prompt engineering, but I'm just going to tell ChatGPT, or basically OpenAI, that we want them to finish my thought. So this is very explicit and tells the machine what we want it to do. And in this case, we don't have to have 2048 max tokens. We can shorten this to 1024. We'll just keep everything else the same. And in this case, we don't really need to post on like an AI bot. We're just posting it as our own regular user. So we can just get rid of that second API call. And we're going to save that. Let's open up our terminal, make sure we don't have any problems. So if we go back, oh yeah, we are missing one last thing. And that is if I go to chat index, we are not properly adding AI assist. So we're going to do the same thing we've done before, except this should be AI assist. And then this should be AI assist. And make sure we have the IntelliSense, change the components like this, pass that in. And we should, this is the completed app, but this is the app we're currently working on. So let's open up our console just in case there is any errors. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a chat room. I'm going to call this AI assist test and hit enter. And over here, let's open up our network tab just to see if we have any errors while we do this. Say, can you help? And let's see if it works. Help me understand. And it works perfectly. So if I just send, now we have what we need. Perfect. Also, what is, and let's see if it, what is important to remember is that, okay. And then if I don't want to, I can just press like forward error and it will just disappear. And with that, we have pretty much all the functionality we need. The last thing we are going to run through is going to be focusing on auth, login, and sign up. So we should be able to create our own user and then log them in as well. All right, so for the auth and login, this is the final build. Basically, what we want to be able to do is if I'm a new user, I want to be able to go test user 2 or something like that. And then we can add a password that we want. We're just going to say 1234. We're going to hit register. Now, there's no indication that some of this has already done anything. So if we go back and register, we can hit login. And now we should be able to log in to our new user with nothing over here. So if I go back, the user is now fully logged in. So we're going to be doing that. I just want to mention that this is probably not like full authentication where you have all of the security, all of the benefits and everything that you can think of when you're dealing with authentication and security. But this will do like the very minimal basics of logging in, registering it, and making sure that they're signed in. So we're just doing the very basics of such. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to close out everything. We don't need those. We can go to app.jsx. And in here, we are going to add our user over here. And like I said, most of this is not secure, so don't use this in a production app. But I just want to give you a brief rundown of the basics of how we can create a user in our chat application. So we're going to have a user, set user, and we're going to set it to null at the beginning. We're also going to have a secret with set secret as well. And I'm going to set this as use state, and I'm going to set this null. And by using those, we want to make sure if the user is authenticated for certain routes. So I'm going to do Boolean is going to be set to user, and as well as Boolean is going to be secret. Now you don't have to set the Boolean, but sometimes it is better to be very explicit about what type this is, and Boolean forces it to be a true or false value. So over here, we have a path of chat, an element of chat, something like this. What we want to do is we're going to set the element. We should only allow the user to go to our chat application if they're authenticated. So you have something like, we can set is auth, And if they're authenticated, we can pass the user into our component as well as the secret into our component. And once we have that, we can also set the navigate component that we created over here from React Router DOM. So this should be actually a component like so. And we are going to force them to go to the /route if they're not signed in. So if we save that, we're going to have this set up. So basically, if we navigate to chat, we're going to see this page if they're authenticated already. Otherwise, we're going to force them to go back to the original homepage. So when we pass this in, so if I go over here, we want to grab this user and the secret as well. And now we're just going to pass the user in over here instead, and the secret as well. So we don't have hard-coded values anymore for our login. And we're going to go back to our app.jsx file. All right, and then also we need a route for the login page. So the route for the login page will be different. So we're going to say route, and we're going to say path is equal to /, and we are going to render out our login element that we have not created. So again, like before, I'm going to have an isAuth like this, and I'm going to say navigate to, I'm going to say /chat like so. I'm going to create a component called login. I'm going to set user like so, and then set secret like so. So the login and the user is going to set this basically state, and we can use that information once they're logged in. And then I need to make sure I close this out, and this is not created. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to import login from @/components/login. Actually, yeah. So over here, I'm going to create a new file called index.jsx. In here, I'm going to do RFCE, make sure this is properly sound, and we're going to have this information. So we're going to go and open up right here. We have failed to load URL. Does this file exist? So we basically just created it. So we are linking back to this section. So I'm just going to restart the server. Sometimes it has issues if you're not doing that. So I'm going to go over here and open it up. Yep. And as you can see, we have the login page. So this is currently the login page, and we have to add the logic. But before that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our state file in the API, and we're going to make our API requests. So the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to change this to post login. I'm going to change this to auth/login because we're going to create another file and router as well. And we're going to keep everything the same. And I'm just going to copy this again, and this is going to be sign up as well. So sign up like that, auth, sign up over here. And in here, I'm going to do use post login mutation and use post sign up mutation. And with that, we're going to go back to our login component, and we're going to start from here. So inside our login component, I am going to do import, use state, and use effect as well. And I'm also going to import the APIs that we just made. So use post login mutation and use post sign up mutation. And inside here, I'm going to do const is register, and we're going to do set is register like so. I'm going to do use state. I'm going to set this to be false, and I'm also going to set the username, and we're going to do set username with use state with an empty string. Now I capitalize this, so make sure you fix that It should be lowercase with the N. Then I'm going to do password as well, set password. And I'm going to set the use state over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say trigger login. So this is going to be the use post login mutation. And we're going to be grabbing this so we can trigger the login. And we're going to do the same thing for trigger sign up. And we're going to do use post sign up mutation. Now this is also going to require us to use result login. So we're going to grab information from this login once we get information returned. And I'm also going to create just like a wrapper function so we can just pass that in easily. So handle login. I'm going to pass in trigger login as well, username and password like so. And then do const handle register. And I'm going to do trigger sign up and pass in username, password like this. And over here, I'm going to do use effect. I'm going to say if result login data dot response. So essentially, if we have a response from the result login, we're just going to set the user. So we're just going to update the username, just making sure if we log in and it's correct. Oops. And we want to set the password as well. Actually, this should be password. This. And we only want to trigger this when result login dot data seems to come back. ESLint disable line. All right, so now let's actually build the component. And over here, I'm going to do div, and I'm going to pass in a class name of login page. And just remember, I've already set up all the classes, so we're just going to have to handle the JSX. So I'm going to do div class name login container. And I'm going to have h2 with a class name of title. And I'm going to call this ChatGPT app. And I'm going to give it a paragraph tag. I'm going to give this class name of register change. And on click, I'm going to pass in set is register. And I'm going to give it a Boolean like so. And flip the paragraph tag. And I'm going to say is register like this. And we're going to say already a user. And if not, are you a new user? So basically this is a Boolean determining whether we're on the register page or a login page. So you can flip the Boolean depending on these criteria. And then from here, I'm going to create a div. And in here, I'm going to give it the input of class name of login input, type of text with a placeholder of username, a value of username, and on change, I'm going to set e is equal to set username. I'm going to put e.target.value, and I'm going to close this like so. And over here, I'm going to do another input. I'm actually just going to go and copy this, and this will be slightly different. So we're going to do login input. This will be password instead. So it's hiding the value. We're going to say password, and I'm going to say password over here. And then this should be set set secret or set password. Yeah. So actually, I realized something. So this actually should be set user and set secret, like this. And the reason why, we need to pass this into login. So set user and set secret. So if you remember, if you go back to app.jsx, we're passing in the set user and set secret over here. So that gets inputted over here, and it's different from the password over here. So this is just a temporary store of the username and the user password, but the set user and set secret is the actual login information that we send to the ChatEngine app. So be careful of that confusion. And over here, I'm going to create a div, and this will be the action buttons. So we're almost done with the form. So these are the two inputs. These will be the buttons to log in or register. So I'm going to say login actions. And over here, I'm going to say is register. And I'm going to say button type is equal to button on click. And we're going to say handle register. I'm going to write register over here. Inside this, I'm going to have a button. I'm going to say type of button like this. I'm going to write on click. I'm going to say handle. Actually, this should be like so, handle login. And we're going to have login over here. And we're going to save it. And with this should be pretty much our entire login page. Now let's double check if we can see that. And this is our current build. Perfect. So ChatGPT tab, are you a new user? So if I click that, we see this change to register, and already a user, we can go back. So this is a very, very simple login page, and usually you want to make this a little more complex and have more interactivity, and maybe even have a different form for register versus login, but we're just trying to keep it simple. So over here, we created our front end. Now we're going to have to deal with the back end as well. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to go to our index.js first. And in here, I'm going to create the routes for our auth login. So this is going to start with /auth, and we're going to have the auth routes. And up here, I'm going to import auth routes from ./routes/auth.js, like that. I'm going to save it, and in our routes folder, we're going to create that file. I'm going to call this auth.js, and essentially we can closely copy most of what we have in OpenAI. We don't really need some of this configuration. So we don't really need OpenAI like that. We don't need the .env as well. So we just need this. I'm going to set up our router. Const router is equal to express.router like so. And then at the end, I'm going to have export default of router. And then from here, I'm going to go and copy this in the OpenAI file and paste it over here. And we're just going to erase majority of this. We just need to keep the errors like that and the res status right here. And we want to change this to a login instead. And you know what? It would probably make more sense to start with sign up, because that's what we start with. So we're going to do sign up as well. So I'm going to copy this over down. And our sign up takes in two values, so username and password from rec.body. So now let me just clarify, how do we get this information of username and password? So if I go back to our API file, we have a sign up, and the sign up takes a payload that we don't know what we're identifying it with. But if you take a look here, trigger signup is coming from that post query. We're passing in username and password, and that gets sent to our backend over here, and we can grab the username and password right here. And then from here, we are going to send the username and password to ChatEngine. And we're going to say ChatEngine response, and we're going to say await axios.post. And what we're going to do is we're going to find the API where we have ChatEngine, and we are going to pass it into our user's URL over here. And I'm going to say username. We're passing in the username over here. Same with secret. So even though it's a password, we're going to have to pass it as secret. And again, it's on the API REST documentation like I showed you before. So if you want more information on how these things work. So now what we also need for logging in, we're going to say private key. So now we haven't used this just yet. We're going to say process.env.private key like so. However, we have not identified this over here in the .env file. So if I go back to our code and actually go to our ChatEngine, the way we get the private key is over here. Now I'll be deleting this project once this is done, but if you want to take a look, this is the private key. You can copy that to a clipboard, and we can write this in our section. We can say private key, and we paste that in, and we can save it. And over here, we will be using that particular private key. And instead of this response.data.choices text, I want to call this response, and we're going to say ChatEngine response.data to grab our information. So this is what's going to be returned. Actually, this should be error message like that. So this is more explicit, so you don't have a big object. So now I usually would test it, but let's go with login because the process is very simple, and we could just test the entire workflow after. So we're going to go over here. We're going to have the same username password for rec.body. And if you remember again, we go back to our login page. This is username password over here being passed in. And so we go to our username. We can just grab the ChatEngine response again, and we're going to pass it over here. And this is going to be a get call because we're doing login now. And we're going to say users/me. And instead of passing it like this, we just need the headers. And we're just going to change this to what we did before when we made an API call to send a message. So this would be project. Actually, I'll show you. We can go to OpenAI to this file in the routes. We can just copy this entire thing over here because this is what we need. And we just need to change a few things. And instead of the bot username, we are going to pass in our username over here, as well as our password. And again, I'm going to go down. Once we have that, I'm just going to copy what we had before for the sign up. I'm going to grab this, paste it over here, and I'm going to save it. And with that, let's see that we have everything. So we have the server running, the server and the client both running. So we can go to the front, and let's just refresh just in case. And let's say I'm a new user, test user 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's make sure we're making a request. So we have a sign up and we get a response. So this is what ChatEngine is giving us right here with all of this information. We have a response as well. We have our password and the username coming in. And then from here, after we registered, we can say, are you a new user, since it's already signed up? We can do login over here. And now we have our new chat. Perfect. Everything is working as expected. And if I wanted to just create my own, something like that, a new chat app, and say, hey, how's it going? I can send it, and the bot should pretty much represent. Okay, so if I do that, I do need to add the particular bot. Actually, I can go over here, add a member. Yeah. So I added the bot again because we're getting an error because I did not add the bot. And I just say, hey, how's it going? And there you go. Pretty good. How about you? So that's how we created a new user, and we created a new chat, making sure that they're all there and logged in. Perfect. So to just recap of our login and auth process, if we go back, what we did was we first created the endpoints, post login, post sign up. So we have both of these API requests. We created the login page, and we're handling the login and the register depending on the response. And we're also setting the user and the secret so we can have a proper navigation over here. So if the user has an auth and a secret, we will navigate them to the appropriate location. And once we're on the OpenAI side of things, or sorry, not the OpenAI, Auth.js side of things, meaning the backend, we have the username and password getting sent to the ChatEngine application, where we are storing it for sign up once we sign up, and also when we log in. And we also have to create we have to use our private key to register a user, and then we want to log them in as well. And just to make sure, and just to reiterate one more time, this is not fully secure. It's very close to being secure, but there are some steps of having like a password on the front being exposed, and it can be intercepted, things like that. So don't use this in a production level. I want to just do very basic authentication, just so you know how you can log into the ChatEngine. So you just have to be wary of that. And with that, now you have a fully built chat application that we used ChatEngine, and then we also used OpenAI to have AI assisted text as well as AI code and text completion. So we can also log in onto our application once we have a user. And once we're logged in, we have regular chat where we can just post a message and it will communicate whoever is in that particular, chat room. And then from here, we can also do AI chat where we can talk. Hey, how's your night going? We can talk to AI bot Steve using OpenAI, and it'll give us a message. He'll be responding to you. And then we also have AI code where we can say, give me a random function, random number function. So if I tell it that, it's going to give me some code that will represent what I'm sending over here. We have a function, and it'll allow us to use functions. So this is a different language. So you just want to say, give me a random number function in JavaScript if you wanted. And then from here, we can do AI assist. So if over here, what is, and then you can just wait for the response, and it'll give us something that will auto complete. So what is the meaning of life? That is a question that has been asked throughout history. So we can just use that as an auto completion tool for our chat messaging application. And that was it. That was everything we have done for this chat application. And this is a pretty cool project. We used OpenAI to give us AI assistant code. And then we also did MERN Fullstack. So essentially we've done a lot of both server routes and client routes. We did everything that will consist of an application. We even did authentication. We even logged into a ChatEngine application as well, and we made that and integrated that with AI. So I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.